we're back with TradTalk podcast now in English, because today's interviewee is Kirti Vashee. We are on the third day of the Abrates conference, and Kirti was very kind to accept our invitation to be interviewed here during the conference. I thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Well, Kirti, he had like really interesting presentations here yesterday. He was like one of the first, right? Yeah. 8 in the morning yesterday, the first day of conference, and it was really interesting about machine translation and translation automation. It was really interesting with loads of useful information. So I think we are going to have an interesting talk today. So Kirti Vashee previously worked in the past for Language Weaver. Could you talk a bit more about it?
Yeah, Language Weaver was a venture capital funded company that pioneered the use of statistical machine translation. So they were one of the first to actually create this whole new wave of machine translation technology that was funded by DARPA in the US government right after 9/11 to see if they could understand the Arabic web more clearly. And they pioneered a lot of what you see happening with statistical machine translation. It's some of the leading experts in the world on SMT. They had spent in France, who went to Google, and Philip Curran had some involvement in their language review. So they were really sort of seminal in the influence of the technology, and they were acquired by SDL, and they became part of SDL's, and today they're part of SDL's machine translation.
That's cool, yeah. And you also worked for Asia Online, where you recently left, right?
Yeah, so I just left Asia Online, and Asia Online was a company that originally had a wonderful vision of translating the English Wikipedia and other open source content into South Asian languages to create knowledge content for those, to address what they called information poverty.
Great.
And it was an experiment that had wonderful motivation, but didn't really work at a business level, and because there was no government support. And so Asia Online became really an expert machine translation developer.
Interesting, very nice. And now currently, you work as an independent consultant on translation technology. He is the moderator of the largest LinkedIn group on MT called the Automated Language Translation that has more than 5,000 members. And he's also an active blogger on machine translation technology. Could you tell a bit more about what you do?
The blog is a blog called Empty Pages, as in the word empty, E-M-P-T-Y. And I talk about the translation industry, how technology is creating disruption, change for the agency and for the enterprise, and just some of the issues that. And while I have, while I was working at an MT vendor while I was doing this, it's an independent opinion. It's not really a venue to sell product for a company. It's really a discussion in the most objective way of the issues, that the industry faces in terms of becoming more efficient, becoming more effective in dealing with large translation challenges. So and actually, it's probably the reason I'm here today, because Ricardo requested that, after following my blog for a few years, he requested me as a speaker.
Great, it was a great idea, because he had a speech yesterday morning, and then a round table. Did you have anything in between?
Yeah, I had one today.
One today, right, yeah.
And then the panel yesterday.
Yeah, the panel with Ricardo Souza. So, could you tell us a bit more how was your impressions on the conference?
Yeah, I was very impressed at the level of interest in machine translation at the translator level. You know, I've been talking about machine translation now for 10 years, and I saw that initially even the agencies were very reluctant. You know, they said, "Oh, this is far from perfect. It's very poor quality. We have no interest in this technology." And it took many years for professional translation companies to get involved with machine translation. You know, it's been a very slow adoption of the technology. Today, there are many companies that are using it, but they're using it still in a very confined way, very controlled way. And the translators have really not been part of the dialogue with the machine translation community. And I think that this conference shows, you know, there were people talking about corpus analysis, there were people talking about data cleaning and data preparation, there were people talking about detailed post-editing strategies, you know, how to use tools like regular expression, you know, just a large number of discussions about how do we do this effectively. And I think it's encouraging because I think the machine translation technology needs this dialogue to evolve faster and further. It's important for this discussion.
I think that the idea of joining translators with translation automation is really important, right? Because otherwise translation automation will be left as a separate thing just for developers or something, and if we join with translators, we can have more advantages on our side, right?
Yeah, I think that today the experience of most translators with machine translation is they're given material to post-edit. So it's like, if it's good machine translation, it's like a high quality fuzzy match. If it's bad machine translation, it's like a very low quality fuzzy match. And so the experience of most translators is very negative. That, you know, machine translation is not a fun experience. It's very moronic, it's very repetitive, it's very mind-numbing work. And so it's not, they don't enjoy it, they don't see any personal leverage in it. But I think we're reaching a point now in the evolution of the technology where there are advances being made, and there's, you know, very recent evolution with a company called Lilt, L-I-L-T, that has a dynamic interactive MT solution. So an individual translator goes there, you add your translation memory, you add glossaries, and you start working on new content that you are translating, and it learns with each individual translation that you do. So it improves from moment to moment. So even just in 15 minutes, it has learned things that you taught in 15 minutes ago, and you won't have to teach it again. You know? So it's a very useful way to interact. You know, so it now becomes like a personal assistant for a translator. It's not available for many languages, but it's available for Portuguese.
Yeah, I've heard. So I've seen it. Actually, I've been following it on Twitter, and they're frequently tweeting things about it, and it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's one that allows, you know, historically translators really had two options. One was to use a rule-based system, and there are translators I've talked to here who use rule-based systems, and you know, the ProMT and Systrand had Portuguese systems that are usable, and you build dictionaries, and it does what it does, but it's a technology that had been around for 20 years or more. And so there were really not much more you could do with that. And then in the statistical world, you needed big computers, you needed lots of data, you needed aggregate, you needed very deep technical skills in many areas. And it was not really possible for very many translators to get there. There are now some toolkits that let you use the Moses technology, and that individual translators could do, but you have to understand what you're doing. My sense is that even from watching the translation agencies struggle with this, is that that's not an optimal strategy for most translators. That tools like Lilt, and maybe there will be new ones that will come that are similar, are the future. And they are, they're learning instantly. They're cloud-based, so you don't need lots of computers. You basically just need internet connection. So you need a good internet connection because it's dynamically doing things.
Right. So it's working all the time on the background.
Yeah, and so like it's doing calculations on the translation, and it's giving you different options, but it needs a strong internet connection. I mean, not like crazy strong internet, but it can't be like the internet connections at a bus stop or a coffee shop.
Right.
It needs to be like a decent, even a decent home connection would work.
Fine. Yeah. Something that was interesting on your presentation yesterday is that you mentioned Brazilian Portuguese. Correct me if I'm like specifying too much, but I remember it was Brazilian Portuguese, not Portuguese in general. That is one of the best MT languages. Would you?
Yeah, for statistical machine systems, actually even for rule-based systems, the Romance languages tend to be the best performing machine. So the quality of the output in general, I'm sure there are many exceptions, but in general, the Romance languages produce the best output. And for some reason, Portuguese and Spanish are the two that Google announced a few years ago their assessment of their languages, and Portuguese was number one. Now, I don't know if it was Brazilian Portuguese because they had a lot more Brazilian Portuguese data that they found.
Right. Yeah. I think so.
Because the way Google builds their MT systems is they find parallel data and they learn from it, and they gather as much web content as they can on the target language side and the source language side, and try and map as much of it together as possible. So just because of the nature of the way the technology works, the way the statistical machine learning process works, Portuguese and Spanish have always been sort of the two best languages for MT, for SMT, for this new wave of technology.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting thing. I didn't know that. I had no idea. And when I tweeted it, people were interested. They were like, how was it? Why?
Well, I mean, when I say best, I mean as a generic tool.
Yeah.
For professional translation purposes, maybe not yet. It's not going to process a lot of the tagging and a lot of the stuff that professional translators have to deal with. But as a general, like for someone just browsing the web, if I went to a Portuguese web and I went to a Spanish website, I can read everything there and understand it to a great extent.
Yeah.
Much better than I can do with a Japanese or a Hindi website, where the machine translation quality is not as good.
Yeah. It's quite.
So I know individual translators there, especially in Spanish, who use Google all the time, just to find words that to look up words or to just speed up the typing. Even though they said it's not something I can hand in, but it speeds up my work. And if I used to do it at 3,000 words a day, and if I can do it now at 4 or 5 or 6, why not?
And even I think I use Google Translate as a starting point of research. So I type it, of course, depending on the confidentiality agreements I have with my client.
Right.
But I type it in, and then I have an idea at least of what I have to look for afterwards. So I have an idea, okay, so maybe it must be something similar to this. Let me check if this is real, if this is really the ideal option here. So I think most of the people may use it, at least for a starting point of research.
Right. And one thing that I think people need to understand about machine translation is that rather than cover anything and everything, in terms of focus, when you work with machine translation, you're always going to get better results if you have a subject domain that you target. So if you are working with mining companies, and then you build up a translation memory asset base and a glossary asset base of and everything to do with mining and the terms, key terms that you need there, your ability to build a machine translation engine will be much better than just saying that, oh, I just want to build an English to Portuguese system, and I do all kinds of translation work. Some days I do birth certificates, some days I do marriage certificates, some days I do travel, some days I do, just if you're changing all the time, machine translation is going to be lower in quality. It's a lower common denominator. But if you focus on a vertical, a clear subject area, you get better and better quality. And I think that is my advice to translators, is that think about it like that. Who are your biggest clients? Organize the translation memory, and then build an empty engine on things like Lilt, and you'll be able to benefit personally at a personal level, without the agency being involved, just even if you work directly with a client.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Very good advice. Thank you very much, Kirti. It was a pleasure to host you on my podcast. And I really appreciate your taking like 10-20 minutes of your time, like from touristing to spending some more time in a room with the AC on and not enjoying the sun outside. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It was a real pleasure to watch you here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. See you next episode. Bye-bye.